A very good day for all of us. Honorable Rector of University of Mataram, Vice Rectors, Dean of Faculty of Teacher Training and Education, Vice Deans, distinguished keynote speakers, invited speakers, presenters, attendees, and finally, all my colleagues, the Third Access Committee to 2021. My name is Dr. Santi Farmasari MED Tisol, the moderator of our first plenary session with our distinguished keynote speaker, Dr. Jennifer Smith from Queensland University of Technology, Brisbane, Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, educators in every school and stakeholders in every community may have beliefs about the importance, the value, and the objectives of homework. Bulk of scholars have also examined how teachers designed, evaluated homework as well as the impact that homework had on students' achievement. However, disparity in beliefs and practices regarding homework also exists within an educational system that has embraced common formative assessments and promoted the use of summative assessments to guide learning interventions. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that most of us in this house are lecturers, teachers who prepare and prompt homework for students. We are also parents who assist or monitor our children completing their homework. We are also students who must complete homework from their lecturers or teachers. But what we really know about homework, especially for language teachers, what pedagogical knowledge we have known about homework itself? How should homework better designed, enacted, and evaluated so that homework can promote better foreign language learning? Honorable Rector of University of Mataram, the Senate Chairman of University of Mataram, Vice Rectors, Dean, Vice Deans, distinguished keynote speakers, invited speakers, presenters, and attendees. In this very session, Dr. Jennifer Smith, MED Tisol from Queensland University of Technology, Brisbane, Australia, in her presentation is going to present and discuss this very important topic related to homework. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jennifer Smith, MED Tisol, is a lecturer at Queensland University of Technology in the School of Teacher Education and Leadership, where she teaches Bachelor of Education students how to teach English as an additional language or dialect learners in the mainstream classroom. She also teaches in the Master of Education course in the area of instructed second language acquisition. Prior to becoming a university lecturer, Dr. Jennifer Smith was a Japanese language teacher who taught in primary and secondary schools for over 25 years. She is now a member of QT's Teaching Research Group. Her research interests include the teaching and learning of foreign languages, especially by young learners in schools. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jennifer Smith was awarded an Education Faculty Outstanding Thesis Award for her thesis called Rethinking Homework for Foreign Language Teaching and Learning, and has recently published an article based on this research. Therefore, today's presentation, Homework Pedagogical Knowledge for Foreign Language Teachers, will draw on this award-winning research. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I present you Dr. Jennifer Smith.
Hello, is everyone able to see my PowerPoint and hear me clearly?
Yes, very clear, Dr. Jen.
Thank you. Thank you, Santi, for your kind introduction. And thank you to the University Mataram Access for inviting me to speak today. I'm very honoured. Today's presentation is about homework pedagogical knowledge for foreign language teachers. And as you heard, as a previous Japanese as a foreign language teacher in Queensland, Australia, I knew that foreign language homework for young learners was a contentious issue in schools. And I also know that many foreign language teachers are unaware of the best way to implement homework or whether to implement it at all. So I set out to investigate the conditions and processes that mediate the accomplishment or the doing of foreign language homework in primary schooling. Based on my research project, today's keynote address presents useful guidelines for designing and planning effective foreign language homework for young learners in primary school. And I will discuss how to establish the conditions that will enable students to successfully accomplish their homework. So first of all, a little about my study. It was an instrumental case study held at an independent P-12 school that had a Japanese as a foreign language program operating in the school. And I my participants were 2 Japanese foreign language teachers. I had 6 students, 2 from year 4, 2 from year 5, and 2 from year 6. And each student had 1 parent involved in the study as well, because I was interested to see the perspectives of teachers, students, and parents who are all involved in the homework process. So the data was collected over a 10-week interview and included things such as semi-structured interviews, student-produced video of themselves doing homework, classroom observations, and a parent focus group. I used sociocultural theory as used in second language education as my theoretical framework. So I was drawing on concepts of mediation, zone of proximal development, scaffolding, and self-talk. And the research question was, what are the conditions and processes that mediate the accomplishment of foreign language homework in primary schooling? I thought that I would just share with you some photos of the Japanese classroom that I was observing. So this one here is of the year 4-5 class. You can see that it's very well decorated with lots of posters, vocabulary in Japanese, which is the foreign language, and lots of realia. You can also see the desks there are single desks that can be moved around the classroom, but also most of the time when I was observing, they were set up in rows. This one photo here is of the year 6 classroom, probably a little barer, but still you can see there's some posters and things around the room, and also some samples of the types of homework sheets, task sheets that were sent home with the students during this study. So first of all, I'd like to look at my data and my findings on teachers. And when I conceptualized homework, I conceptualized it as having a before, during, and after phase. So this slide here shows the findings from my data about the things that teachers can do before, during, and after setting homework. So most importantly, homework tasks should be related to classroom learning. Because homework is completed outside of a teacher's control, then homework tasks should be familiar tasks to the students. That is, tasks that students have already had practice in completing in class under teacher guidance. So for example, perhaps something like preparing a self-introduction. So they should have had practice in doing that in class before being asked to go home and do it by themselves. Vocabulary and grammar should also be familiar and to the students, and the homework should use familiar skills. So for example, if you're asking students as part of their homework to look up a word in a vocabulary list, then they should have had practice doing that in class prior to you asking them to go home and do that outside of the teacher's control. As well, communication of homework goals and expectations to both students and parents. So we're talking about young learners here. So parents are part of the equation as well. They normally supervise homework so that the learning goal is clear. This can be done through things like notes in school diaries, through email communication, physical notes that you send home, or even conducting parent information evenings, perhaps at the start of the year, as to what your expectations are around homework. Also, scaffolding. In the planning stages of homework, teachers should think about the resources that students are going to need to complete the homework, such as vocabulary lists, alphabet charts, or in my case, hiragana charts, grammar rules that they might need to complete homework. Students need to be able to have access to these resources in order to be able to complete their homework. As well, another important finding was that teachers need to consider the self-regulated learning skills that learners will need in order to complete the homework outside of the teacher's control. And there should be time provided in class to model and practice these skills. Moving on to during homework. So when the students are actually doing the homework at home or outside of the classroom, teachers should ensure that there are up-to-date resources. A lot of us now are working, online and making sure that the resources that students need are updated constantly online, and also keeping those avenues of communication open with both students and parents, so that if they have a difficulty with the homework, that they're able to contact the teacher either through email or organising a face-to-face meeting to be able to work out their problem. Now, after homework, of course, then it's the teacher's job to give feedback on the homework, and I'm going to have a closer look at feedback in a moment. But also, keeping quality records is very important. It's not good enough just to tick off that students have completed or not completed homework. Actually, we can get a lot more information from students' homework. So in our mark books, perhaps we should think about doing things like recording against each macro skill. So how have they done in a listening task that you set for homework, or a speaking task, or a reading or a writing task, and assign marks so that you can have an understanding of how well students are progressing, which then helps teachers to inform their teaching. Okay, so working out how you might group students in class, or if there's a concept that all students haven't understood clearly, revising and going back over it. So having a closer look at feedback, there are a number of ways, different ways that teachers can deal with returned homework. So for example, homework can be marked in class by the students, with the teacher providing the correct responses. It can be self-marked either by the individual, in a group, or marked in a pair. Students can swap homework. Teachers or students can provide answers either orally or written on the board. This, I found in my study, was much less of a burden on the teacher. So as we all know, if we have been teachers, that setting homework is quite often a burden because it means we need to collect and mark it. So marking it in class does help to reduce this burden. It also allows the opportunity for immediate student reflection, the opportunity for students to ask questions, and allows teachers to be more responsive to student needs. Homework can also, or completed homework can also be used in class as part of a warm-up exercise, such as presenting a weather forecast that has been prepared at home. Or homework difficulties could be used to prompt discussion about how to learn a language. And this approach helps students to develop the self-regulated learning skills that I was talking about earlier, and builds their language learning strategy repertoire. So for example, if a student has, if you've asked your students to learn, 10 new words, vocabulary words for homework, and you've conducted a quick quiz in the classroom, the next lesson to see how they've gone with learning those words, then students who have done well, you can ask them the question. Oh, you did really well in today's vocabulary quiz. Would you like to share with the rest of the class how you went about learning those new words? And the student might say something like, well, I had my parents test me. And another student might put their hand up and say, well, I made up a song to help me learn the new words. Or another student might say, oh, I made up some actions to the words. Or another student might say, I wrote them out 5 times, then covered them over and tested myself. So by having that conversation in class, all the students now have a repertoire of different language learning strategies that they can use to learn vocabulary from having that discussion and hearing what other students have done. And so I think developing these self-regulated learning skills is a very important role of the teacher regarding homework. Also, homework that's collected and marked outside of class, sometimes we need to do that. So homework might be completed on a piece of paper that can be handed in, and then later on the teacher marks the homework and then returns it next lesson. So this allows a teacher time to be more responsive to students in the subsequent lesson. But what I found in my study was we need to make sure that when we do this, that teachers make sure that not too much time lapses in between collecting the homework, marking it, and returning the feedback. Otherwise, it can become irrelevant to the teaching and learning cycle. Also consider the timing of returning or marking or discussing the homework during a lesson. So are you going to do it at the start of a lesson, in the middle, or at the end? And allocate sufficient time. So you probably need more than a couple of minutes. Make sure you provide enough time to actually engage with the homework with the students. I did find that homework dealt with at the start of a lesson did increase the opportunities for teacher responsiveness and collaborative feedback, whereas homework that was dealt with at the end of a lesson tended to be very rushed, because as we know, we always run out of time at the end of a lesson. And then finally, whose role is it to apply feedback? Well, the tension that I discovered around homework feedback was whose responsibility or role is it to apply that feedback? I think with young learners in particular, but probably those in secondary as well, they need to be explicitly taught how to apply that feedback. They need to be taught what to do with feedback. I don't think that students naturally understand how to respond to feedback, and I think it's an area where teachers need to spend some more time helping students learn what the feedback means and then how they can use that feedback to improve their performance next time. Okay, so I've just returned to the previous slide just so that you can see a summary of my findings in relation to the things that teachers need to consider before, during, and after homework. And now I'd like to move on to students and my findings regarding them around homework. So in relation to students successfully completing homework, I found these 5 points. So students used languaging or self-talk. So I found this out through the student-produced videos that they took of themselves completing homework. Students would talk to themselves to help manage the homework task, make meaning of the new language they were learning, and internalize new understandings. Students also needed to know how to organise their learning materials, making sure they took home what they needed to complete the homework. So for example, the vocabulary list or the hiragana chart, or the grammar rules that they might need to complete the homework. They also needed to learn how to seek assistance and ask for help when they were unsure before the homework was due. So this assistance could be from parents, from siblings, or from the classroom teacher. They also needed to learn how to check feedback that was given on homework and then ask the teacher if they were still unsure about what the homework meant. And it was very important for students to maintain their motivation. So talking about ways to be motivated and engaged. Now, I'd like to take a closer look at one of these findings, which is languaging. So what is languaging? Languaging is private speech or self-talk. It's talking out loud to yourself. So it's a concept written about by Vygotsky. So when confronted with a difficult task, people will often talk out loud to help focus on and understand the problem. So if you've ever had to follow a set of instructions, you've probably used private speech or languaging when you've been following the instructions. The concept of languaging is the use of private speech to solve a problem or make meaning while learning a new language. It can be written or spoken. It's used as a cognitive tool to regulate higher mental processes. So like I mentioned before, focusing attention, solving problems, evaluating, planning, memorizing, which is very important to second language learning, and thinking logically. So according to Merrill Swain, who is the scholar who first coined the term languaging, languaging is the process of making meaning and shaping knowledge and experience through language. We can observe students operating on linguistic data through languaging, and in languaging, we see learning taking place. So I'd like to show you a couple of video extracts from my data. So this is one of my students called Henry. He is a Year 4 student, and he'd been learning Japanese for about a semester. This excerpt is from the first video that he recorded for me. And the second video extract that I'll show you is a little further on in the video, where he seems to have forgotten about the camera and he's concentrating on his work. And this is when he uses languaging, so self-talk, a hiragana chart, which is a Japanese alphabet, and the task sheet to complete this task. So I'll just show you the first one. This is when he's actually talking to me. So this isn't languaging, he's actually talking to me through the video.
Hello, I'm doing my Japanese homework now. I've already accidentally started some of it, but here is Haru, then Hana.
Okay, so that's when he was talking to me, but later on, he's engrossed in his homework and he actually starts talking to himself in order to do the homework. So I'll show you this one. So you can see how Henry was using languaging or talking out loud along with these other mediating tools, the hiragana chart and the actual homework sheet itself, in order to accomplish the task. So the languaging functions that were identified in this study are here on the screen. So I found that languaging was used for organising the self, managing emotions, motivating the self, evaluating work that they had completed, learning strategies such as using mnemonics, noticing a gap in their knowledge, writing, memorising, decoding or sounding words out, understanding the task, and as we just saw there, focusing attention and refocusing attention on what they were doing, metalinguistic knowledge, and then also recalling and activating prior knowledge, which Henry was showing evidence of in that little video script. So I'd like to show you one more, which is another student. This is Flynn. He's in year 5. And as part of his homework, he's using a web-based application called Quizlet to learn vocabulary from the unit of work about that they're doing in class about the solar system. First, Flynn realizes a gap in his knowledge and he has to check his homework sheet. And then he reads the word out loud to focus his attention. Then he uses languaging to memorize the word by repeating it out loud. So I'll just let you listen to this one.
Milky Way.
Amanagawa, 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 Amanagawa.
Milky Way. Amanagawa, Milky Way.
Amanagawa,
Amanagawa, Milky Way.
Amanagawa.
Okay, so Flynn told me in his stimulated verbal recall interview that he had heard on the radio that if you could repeat something 10 times, you will remember it. So his use of repetition here could also be interpreted as a language learning strategy. So my findings in relation to languaging are that languaging serves as an important mediational tool for primary school students when doing their foreign language homework. Students use languaging for both self-regulation and meaning making or language learning. So students like Flynn, who you just saw in the previous video, were avid languages. So they used languaging a lot and they used it regularly for both language learning and self-regulated learning purposes. These students produced less errors on their homework tasks and in their final assessments, which I think raises the question for further research as to whether languaging is merely evidence of language acquisition or whether languaging actually contributes to or amplifies foreign language learning. So regardless, I think that languaging is a really exciting concept that language teachers could actually encourage their students to use when completing their homework to help self-direct their language learning.
Dr. Jane, my apology. Yes. 2 more minutes. If you don't mind.
Yes, thank you. I know we started a little bit late. So I also did have some findings. That's okay. I also did have some findings on parents. And so I'll quickly just show you that slide before I finish up. So with parents, I found that it was very important for them to establish a homework routine, okay? And this was one of the main things that parents did, was establishing this homework routine of coming home from school, setting a time when homework would happen, and monitoring their students. Parents also plan to hand over responsibility for doing homework over time. So students in year 4, parents were very much involved. As students got older, by the time the students were in year 6, then parents had handed over responsibility for doing homework to their child, okay? And they would really only check in with them, oh, have you done your homework? Not actually monitor them while they were doing it. Parents also needed to build knowledge about how languages are learnt. A lot of parents don't speak a second language in Australia, and so they didn't really know how to help. So it would be really useful if they built some knowledge around that. And communication networks were also very important for parents, speaking with other parents, finding out about the homework expectations and guidelines. Okay, so I will, I did have this slide to show you, but I've run out of time. So in summary, I'll just say that the conditions and processes mediating the accomplishment of homework are that teachers plan for and provide macro and micro scaffolding for students' foreign language learning and self-regulation, that they educate and empower parents through effective homeschool communication, and that completed homework can inform teaching and be used to develop student metacognitive skills through teaching students to reflect and apply on and apply homework feedback. Students, they operationalize the homework through accessing and using mediational tools like you saw in the videos, developing their own self-regulated learning skills and self-scaffolding skills such as languaging. But this is enabled by the home conditions which are set up by parents, who then take responsibility for the home-based conditions and supporting the learner's management and completion of the task through the establishment of homework routines, a handover of responsibility. And parents can be supported in this by effective homeschool communication and wider community networks. So thank you very much for your time today. I do also have a poster, an infographic that summarizes all I was talking about you today. And I also have a recent article that's just been published about scaffolding homework for foreign language learning. And my contact details are there on the slide if anyone would like to ask for any further information. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jennifer Smith. That was a very insightful presentations. So if you don't mind, please allow me to provide a brief summary of what you have presented to us. So Dr. Jennifer Smith, dear participants, has highlighted that homework is actually a cycle. There is a process before, during, and after, which involves teachers, students, and parents with different responsibilities. Dr. Smith has also highlighted that homework can promote and develop self-regulated learning among students. There are some overarching points that I note here, especially for language teachers, in which we need to consider when we are preparing, prompting, and evaluating homework. These points are about how we communicate, how we scaffold the homework to students, how we communicate with the students' parents, so that the parents can get involved in helping and assisting and monitoring their children's completing their homework. And most importantly, homework has to inform and form learning. So dear participants, I see that you have written some questions in the chat box. Dr. Smith, if you don't mind, I'd like to read the first question from Mr. Burhanuddin. He asked, how to deal with students who think that homework is a burden so that they are reluctant to do it from a cultural and psychological perspective? That's a very,
that's a very difficult question to answer.
And psychological perspective.
Yeah, because I think that goes to motivation. So that was one of my points about how students need to take responsibility for developing their motivation, to learn a foreign language, a second language. And I think also too, if students know that that homework that they're doing is going to be used back in class the next time, they're in class, then they're more likely to want to complete their homework and to do it well, because they know that they're going to be using it in class the next lesson. And this is why it's important that teachers are actually making homework part of their teaching and learning cycle, because it does give students that encouragement then and the need to complete their homework, because they know that they have to rely on it the next day in class.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. This may also relate to how homework is viewed and organized in different countries. Here in Indonesian classroom, homework is like an everyday routine that students have to complete. So every day, students will return home from school with homeworks in their bags. And then their parents will ask, do you have homework? So sometimes we assume that homework means learning. Homework means studying what the students studied in the classroom. So this kind of cultural perspective may also take place in, seeing homework for students. Dr. Smith, if you don't mind, we still have 2 questions here. The second question is coming from Dian Safitri. She is asking about feedback. In giving a feedback, for instance, when I assign an essay, a writing descriptive text, I make so many corrections on each wrong grammar, misspelling words, misspelled words, sorry. Is it good or not for the students?
Yeah, this is an interesting question and probably a little outside of the scope of my study, but as you know, as far as I observed in the classroom, that it was actually quite demotivating for the students if they saw their whole piece of homework with red marks and corrections all the way through, and particularly with the younger students. So I would suggest that perhaps what could be done is that you concentrate on perhaps 1 or 2 things that you are learning in class, and that would be what you provided the correction on. I know that but I would also make sure that parents are aware of that. Because otherwise, parents can say, why aren't you correcting every single thing in my student's writing?
Exactly. Parents like to see their students' writing corrected. Every single word is corrected so that students can learn more. That's what our parents believe.
Yeah, but I think that sometimes there's value in just concentrating on 1 or 2 things. So I'm just going to concentrate on past tense, for example, how you've used past tense in this essay. And if students are aware of that, so that's part of that communicating the goal of that particular homework. If the goal of that homework is to improve past tense, then it's perfectly acceptable that that's what you'll be concentrating your corrections on.
Okay, thank you so much for the feedback. So Dian Safitri, Dr. Smith is suggesting you to have a focus on every lesson. So maybe if your lessons is a simple past tense, then maybe you may correct on that particular point in the student's writing. Thank you, Dr. Smith. The next question, Dr. Smith, if you don't mind, from one of our keynote speakers actually here, Mr. Dr. Salman Al-Farizi from Malaysia. He asked, why are Australian young interested to learn Japanese language?
Yeah.
Is it an annual program from Australian government, or is it your own initiative?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So we have the study of a foreign language is mandated in all Queensland schools and most other states in Australia as well, from prep through to probably about year 8 or 9. And schools will offer a foreign language based on how they can resource staff. And Japanese is one of the most popular foreign languages that are being taught in Australia, but also Chinese, German, French, Spanish are quite often found being taught in schools as well. And actually in the ACT, there are a lot of schools there that study Indonesian, for example. So it's not an annual program. It's something that's been happening for a long time, but I guess there's just been a lot of support for teaching Japanese. So there are a lot of resources, and the Japanese government, I guess, offers, a lot of support as well for teachers through training and things like that as well. So it's a very popular language to be studying in Australia.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Smith. So is that the school decisions to teach Japanese in that school?
Yes, yeah, schools, individual schools decide based on how they can staff that foreign language, what foreign language they will provide. Yeah.
Okay, right. Thank you so much. A very last question from Mr. Zamzam. Ahmad Zamzam is one of our academic staff here in English education. He asked about homework in elementary schools, especially in rural elementary schools. Students in rural elementary schools, when completing the homework, they find that completing homework is very challenging because they have a very limited literacy, limited learning resources, and their parents are also not well educated to help or assist their children completing the homework or to help their children learning. So is there any effective strategy to solve the problem, in your opinion, Dr. Smith? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's a really difficult problem. And I think that, you know, what I would suggest from my research is that this is why tasks that you set for homework should be tasks that are familiar to the students and that use familiar vocabulary and familiar skills that they've already learnt and practiced in class, so that the teacher's already modelled how to do that and provided guidance, and they've had that practice in class. That way, when they go home and they're outside of the teacher's control, they're more likely to be able to achieve the homework because it's all familiar content, familiar tasks, etc. And so looking at homework there as being, you know, revision and practice of what is happening in class would be my suggestion.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Jennifer Smith, for all your responses to our participants' questions. I believe that that was the last questions, and we are running out of time, actually. So thank you so much, Dr. Jennifer Smith. Thank you for being with us in the third Access 2021. I believe that after listening and discussing homework pedagogical knowledge with you, our views and assumptions about homework, how homework should be better designed, prompt to our students. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, please join me to give a very big round of applause for Dr. Jennifer Smith. On behalf of the Third Access and the University of Mataram, we would like to express our sincere gratitude to you, Dr. Jennifer Smith, for joining us in our Third Access 2021. We do hope that you will be willing to join us in our future international conferences, or probably visiting us here in Lombok in person. So Brisbane and Bali is very close. In normal situations, there are usually 3 direct flights from Brisbane to Bali, and Lombok is only another 20 minutes flight from Bali. So we'll be very pleased to have you here in person, visit us here at the University of Mataram. All right, Dr. Jennifer Smith. Following this, we are having Dr. Tesha Singupta Irving from University of California, Berkeley, USA, who will talk about toward epistemic heterogeneity in STEM education. Dr. Jane, we will be more than pleased if you are willing to stay with us. But if you have other agendas ahead, we do not mind your leaving our Zoom room. But of course, we are very pleased to have you here staying with us. One more time, thank you very much, Dr. Jennifer Smith, for the very fruitful discussions about homework pedagogical knowledge for language teachers. Thank you. Goodbye for now. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, Dr. Smith. It's already 12:30 p.m. in Brisbane, Australia. Thank you so much. Goodbye again. See you. I'm now handing over the next sessions to the beautiful MC.
Our speakers